flower communion. Now, in just a few moments, Lane will tell us about the history of our flower communion and lead us through how our sharing of the flowers ritual itself is going to work. But I think it's worth reflecting first on why has this ceremony become such a well-loved annual tradition? What larger truths does this enduring ritual allow us to embody together? As I look out over the flowers we have arranged up here, I find striking the diverse beauty of each of the individual blooms. Somehow, the individual radiance of each one of them is magnified both by its unity with and its contrast with the other flowers. Also, though, gathered together, they form a bouquet that has its own new form of beauty, different than that of any of the separate individual flowers. Well, that's quite a metaphor for what happens when we gather in community together, each of us bringing our individual talents, abilities, challenges, and blessings for our world and one another, each of us bringing our own perspectives and desires. And at our best, just like we do when we exchange flowers in the flower communion, we trade at least something of these magnificent expressions of our individual selves with one another. At our best, each of us goes home with something new and beautiful, some broadened perspective because of our encounters with one another. And at our very best, we form this radiant bouquet that is greater than the sum of its individual elements. Together, our individual flowerings are amplified so that we are all far better able to nourish souls, transform lives, and do justice. Now, I think that within the metaphor that I just described dwells what has been a historical theological challenge for us as Unitarian Universalists. On the one hand, we arise from an ancestry with a strong inclination toward individualism. After all, we have been the heretics who have again and again questioned dogma and called for the freedom and the right of conscience for the individual. We're the products of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, Ralph Waldo Emerson's self-reliance, Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience. Yet, our history also includes the legacy of the Universalists who valued a religious community of all souls and believed in the universal salvation of all people. Likewise, our Unitarian ancestors gave us our covenantal way of being together. We make a promise as a religious community to walk together in the ways of love. Now, we've tended to view this instinct toward individualism, and sometimes radical individualism, up against our inclination for forming deep religious community as sort of standing in linear opposition to one another. From that perspective, we've had to try to balance the rights and inherent worth of each individual with our desire to create strong and institutionally sustainable communities. We've seen it as either or rather than both and. And that's understandable given a long human history in which community norms and biases have so often stifled and oppressed individual human expression and flourishing. I think, though, that what the flower communion helps us to better understand is that this linear duality between individuality and community doesn't necessarily have to exist. The interplay between each of us as individuals and the larger community we wish to create can be far more complex and far more multidimensional than that. Like when we gather our flowers together, we can create communities that value our differences and see them as what fuels the richness and fullness of the community as a whole. We can create communities wherein each of us can radiate our own beauty by locating ourselves in both unity, solidarity, and loving contrast with one another. Our flower ritual reminds us and helps us to more deeply grasp that rather than having to be in opposition to one another, individuality and communalism can exist together in harmony. And that truly is communion. So, Lane, let's have a flower communion.
In the city of Prague, in the land of Czechoslovakia, in the year 1923, there was a church. But the building didn't look very much like a church. It had no bells, no spires, no stained glass windows. It had no piano to make beautiful music. It had no candles or chalices, and it had no flowers. The church did have some things. It had 4 walls and a ceiling and a floor. It had a door and a few windows. It had some wooden chairs. But that was all, plain and simple. Except the church also had people who came to it every Sunday. It had a minister, and his name was Norbert Chopik. He had been the minister at this plain and simple church for 2 years. Every Sunday, Minister Chopik went to the church, and he spoke to the people while they listened, sitting quietly and still in those hard wooden chairs. When he was done speaking, the people talked among themselves for a bit, and then they went home. And that was it. No music, no candles, no food after service, not even breakfast tacos. Springtime came to the city of Prague, and Norbert Chopik went out for a stroll. The rains had come, the birds were singing, the flowers were blooming all over the land. The world was beautiful. Then an idea came to him, simple and clear, plain as day. The next Sunday, he asked all the people in the church to bring a flower, or a budding branch, or even a twig. Each person was to bring one. What kind, they asked. What color, what size? You choose, he said. Each of you choose what you like. And so on the next Sunday, which was also the first day of summer, the people came with flowers of all different colors and sizes and kinds. There were yellow daisies and red roses. There were white lilies and blue asters, dark-eyed pansies and light green leaves, pink and purple and orange and gold. There were all of these colors and more. Flowers filled all of the vases, and the church wasn't so plain and simple anymore. Minister Chopik spoke to the people while they listened, sitting quiet and still in those still hard wooden chairs. These flowers are like ourselves, he said. Different colors and different shapes and different sizes, each needing different kinds of care, but each one beautiful, each one important and special in its own way. When he was done speaking, the people talked amongst themselves a little bit, and then they each chose a different flower from the vases before they went home. And that was all. And it was beautiful, plain and simple as the day. It is now time for us to share in our own flower communion. I ask that as each of you approach the communion vases, to do so quietly, reverently, with the sense of how important it is for each of us to address our world and one another with gentleness, justice, and love. Once you bring your flower up, select a different flower to take home with you, one that particularly speaks to you. As you take your chosen flower, noting its particular shape and beauty, please remember to handle it carefully. It is a gift that someone has brought to you. It represents that person's unique humanity and therefore deserves your kindest touch. And if you did not bring a flower with you this morning, that is okay. Please still join us in our flower communion and take a flower home with you. Norbert Chopik started this ritual to celebrate the beauty of our faith and the people in it. Remembering that the sounds of children are part of the quiet, let us now share quietly in this Unitarian Universalist ritual of oneness, community, and love. And people who are in the sanctuary can start moving towards the center, and we'll use that as the main way to get to the flowers. And if you're in house and hall, there is a vase of flowers in there for you for flower communion as well.